All right, hello, welcome. The purpose of this video is to review array lists and getting ready for the AP test. The instructions about the AP test this year said there's pretty good, or actually they know one question is either going to be about arrays or array lists, or maybe a little bit of both. So we're going to review both of those, starting with array lists. Um, and so just kind of the idea of an array list, if you forgot, is regular arrays, you have to put the length here. So if I was making a Twitter thing with all my followers, I have, of course, thousands of followers due to my funny jokes. And, I wanted to, you have to say the number, right? If you do it with a regular array, how many spots you want, how many slots. So this would be a max of 1,000 followers. And one of the big differences for array lists is you don't have to know that. It's called dynamic, so it can change with time. All right, so that is one of our differences between arrays and array lists, is that the array list can change, the size can change, and the size of array is fixed. Take a minute, pause the video here, and see if you can remember any other differences between the two before continuing. Other differences, all right? The huge one is how you access them. And this is a part where I think it gets really confusing. So for an array list, you use the name of the array list dot method, right? And we're going to review a bunch of these methods because that's one of the things I hope you have notes. I'm not a huge believer in you're going to need a ton of notes to reference for this AP test, but if you forget all the different method names and how they work for array lists, hopefully by the end of the day you'll have that. All right, and arrays, you generally don't use dot methods. I think there's a dot length method, but other than that, you mainly access the information by doing the name of the array and then bracket, and then whatever position you are trying to reference, up 0 up to 1 less than the length. Okay, and then the only real advantages in real life, I've used array lists way more than arrays. They're super useful. Arrays, not so much, but arrays you can store primitives, so like basic information. If you just had a bunch of ints or a bunch of doubles or something, an array might make sense. An array list, to get around that, they can't store primitives, but to get around it, they make these special object classes called integer, boolean, double, whatever, and those are essentially correspond to the primitive type, like int, double, boolean. So that's how they kind of get around that with array lists. Okay, so this is another thing that we're going to type up a .java notes file today, and in there, one of the things I want you to have down is how do you create an array list, right? Because I always have to look this up. There's so many parts to it. But the variable type is array list, and then whatever you want to store. So you can store string, but you can also store your own custom objects in there. Then you give it a name, equals new, because we're creating an object, and then array list, whatever parameter type again here, whatever's being stored in them, and then open close parenthesis. Right, so this again will be in your notes later, but it's a good thing to know because I have a hard time remembering it, and it might be an easy thing to look up on the test. Okay, so here's an example, a second example, right? Oh, and yeah, what's different here is instead of storing strings, I'm storing a student object. So maybe this student object has like I think in the example we're going to do later, the student object actually has a name, a GPA, and a car, like a vehicle. So instead of storing strings, I'm storing my own object type called student and name it smart people. And one of the methods is how many are in there, smart people.size. So if this was for AP computer science, take your best guess. Based on the fact I'm the teacher, but I'm going to guess that's 0, but who knows. All right. And then one other one, the other object you're going to be working today is cars. So here's what it would look like if you were going to make an array list of cars. So the car is a type here, right? And I should say specifically that the size is actually 0 at the start. So this code up here actually kind of is dumb in a way, because if you haven't added any students at this point, this is just going to be 0. So I was trying to make a joke there, but at any rate, yeah, when you default, there's nothing in it. So in this case, this cars array list, there's nothing in it at the start. All right, so just to give you a kind of a visual of how some of these methods work, if you want to add a new value to your array list, you just type the name of the array list, which in this example is names, and then add, and then you pass in whatever object you're adding, right? So in this case, it looks like we're adding Cindy. So we're storing a bunch of strings, and we're going to add a string called Cindy. And the default add, if you don't specify an index, it adds it to the end. So in this case, Emily would be in 0, Bob would be in 1, and then Cindy would be added in the 2 position after you call dot add. Okay, so the other type of add is you can specify it to add it in a certain spot, which certainly there's cases where you want to add it in a certain position. So in this case, in the beginning, we had Emily in position 0, looks like Bob position 1, Caroline position 2. Sorry, that doesn't line up very good. But if I call an add and specify 1 as a position, Anne will get put in position 1, and then Bob and Caroline will slide down. So essentially she kind of bumps them out of place. So she's now in spot 1, and Bob and Caroline have been moved down by 1. Similarly to this remove, you don't really specify the name you're trying to remove, you specify the index. So if I called names.remove1 from this array list up here, it's going to remove whatever name is at position 1, which is Anne. So that'll knock it out, and then it'll look like that. Hopefully these visuals help. Okay, one other quick question about when you call remove, right? So here's another example. We have the names array list. We've got Emily, Bob, Caroline. And what do you think is going to be printed by this code? So what is basically returned by the remove method? You don't have to store the return value, but sometimes you might want to know what was removed. And so what would be printed here? Okay, and so what remove actually does, hopefully you had a chance to think this through, but remove returns whatever element is being removed. So in this case, the Caroline string would be returned and then printed out here. So it'd be no longer be in the array list, but it would be stored in this variable we called name, the string name. Okay, so there's also a set method. All right, and so what set does is it wipes out the value that's in whatever position we want and replaces it. So in this case, Bob, let's say Bob was having a bad day, so we want to take him out, he's no good anymore, and replace him with the greatest known individual is Mr. Paris. So we would take position 1 and it would be wiped out, and in its place would go the string Paris. Okay, so that's one other method that you might end up using called .set. All right, and it returns, actually, you could take a guess. What do you think it's going to return here? And the answer to that is actually returns whatever it replaced. So Paris would now be in spot 1, but Bob will get returned because he got wiped out. And so then it'll just print out Bob in that case. Okay, one other thing. What do you think? So now that the array list looks like this, with Emily, Paris, Caroline, what do you think will get printed out here? Okay, and hopefully you realize that it just prints the name out with a return one at a time. Emily, Paris, Caroline. And this is called an enhanced for loop, which you can use with both arrays and array lists. And they're super useful. So this just takes a string one at a time from the array list called names, because that array list has strings. So it stores it one at a time in str and then prints it out. All right, and so it goes the variable type that's in the array list, colon, the name of the array, and then you use the variable down here, in this case, just to print it out. Remember, the drawback of these is it goes through every single one one at a time. So if you only wanted to do like the first half or something, you couldn't use an enhanced for loop. And you also can't modify them. So if we wanted to, like, change it to add a hello to the front of all these, we couldn't do it with an enhanced for loop. We'd have to do the regular loop. Right, and you'll practice some of those as we get into the code part of this lesson. All right, so what you need to do now, if you haven't already done so, is get the starter code for this lesson. And you're going to be doing there's 3 files, ArrayList notes for the AP test, and then a car and a student class, because we're going to make ArrayLists that have students and cars in them. And so you need all 3 of these files. I would put them in their same sort of package, would probably make the most sense. And then definitely store these in a place that you want to reference when you take the AP test, especially this ArrayList notes, because you can look back in here, and if you forget like how does the get method work or the set method work, you can look back in here and hopefully you'll have an example of how to do it. All right, and you're going to do all your work in ArrayList notes, right? So the other two are just there because we're going to populate ArrayList with students and cars. Okay, so load this up and basically just read through these directions and then try each part. And if you get stuck or want to check your answers, then come back to this video. Right, so you can kind of go back and forth. Pause the video, type a little bit, see if your answer's right. And type a little more. Watch a little more of the video, etc., etc. I think that's much better than just watching me type out these answers. Okay, so all the directions are inside of here. You just have to load it and then read through the comments to figure out what's going on. All right, so I'm going to start going through some of these again. Hopefully you've tried this stuff before you watch this part. So we're going to create an array list of students, right? So that means we're going to use this student object, and then we want to add these students that we already created here into that new array list. So it's just array list, the type of thing you're storing in there, which isn't strings, it's our own student object. I'm going to call it students, and then do new array list, the type that's in there, student, and then parenthesis, parenthesis, and that creates our array list. Okay, I already made the students just to save time, passed in their name and their GPA. Again, the GPA is mostly used, a result of having me as a teacher. Usually my students do so poorly. That's why. At any rate, now I'm going to add them. So you have to add them one at a time. So I'm going to do the name of the array list. It is called students dot add, and then just type the name of the student that we're adding each time. I'm going to call students dot add Adam, Zach. Okay, and the last one is named Bumpkin, so we add that one in there. Okay, so now that we have those students added, now we have a new student object, Cole. He's been striving to get just pi for his GPA. Looks like he's doing a pretty good job so far. And since he's the coolest, I want to put him in the 0 spot and move all these down. All right, and so again, hopefully you tried this, but we're going to call students.add, but now we're going to do a position. So if we want Cole to be at the very top, we do position 1, and then we just do the name of the object we're adding at position 0. Sorry, not position 1, position 0, and that'll move Adam, Zach, Bumpkin down one each. So Bumpkin will now be in our last index, which should be 3. Okay, so next up, again, hopefully you've tried these already, is we don't want Bumpkin objects, so we want to remove Bumpkin. And so again, it should be in this point, we should be Cole is 0, Adam is 1, Zach is 2, and Bumpkin is 3. So if I want to remove it, I just call remove in position 3. All right, and again, we could store it like we did in the notes. If you wanted to store it, you could call student bump or whatever and actually store the student that gets removed. But oftentimes you just want to remove it like that, right? And then there'll be no more value at index 3. All right, I think I'm going to stop here and just go on and make a second video just because we're running out of time. So see that video for the rest of these notes.